Welcome to the Bottle Talk series, Behind the Bottle. Now, I've personally met and talked with winemakers all over the world, and many of them have other jobs or hobbies, but today's interview is our first true triple stack. We have with us Stanton Barrett. Yes, he's the winemaker at Stanton Barrett Family Wines, but he also had a racing career, NASCAR, Xfinity, Indy truck. He also was a stuntman and a stunt director for a few hundred movies, including Spider-Man, Jurassic Park, Blade, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. So without further delay, Stanton Barrett. Stanton, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Absolutely. I'm glad that with the time change and with the time difference, I'm glad that you're on the East Coast this week. I know you bounce a lot back and forth. So winemaking and racing right now, that's sort of the two big things that you're doing. A race car driver making wine, or are you a winemaker that still has his foot in racing? How would you describe yourself?
Everybody asked me those kind of questions when I was racing and doing films to winemaking and everything else that I do. But yeah, I guess it kind of go hand in hand. I don't race so much full time, as a professional driver, but I still do quite a few movies and, have my hands into the wine. So I guess they all are collectively on a horizontal line there. Just some weekends take more of one and other weekends or weekdays take more of the other.
Well, let's back up a little bit. So you're racing, right? What's the transition that you go from race car driver to winemaker? You're driving, you're hitting turn 3, you're doing 180, 200 miles an hour, and all of a sudden in your head just pops, goes, you know what? I think I'm gonna make some wine. Can you talk us through kind of what was the inciting incident that got you interested in wine and becoming a winemaker?
Well, the story goes a long time ago when I was a kid, actually. We had a small little gas station grocery store that had a little wine section in the back, and I got a job cleaning the back of the bakery in our local town, which was kind of a famous bakery called Shat's Bakery. And I told my parents I wanted a job, and I used to go back into the bakery after school and clean the floors and get all the mess off. But I was excited that I had a job, and I used to go to the wine store with my mom and buy wine from my dad. So I would look at bottles. I love art. I was an artist and drew a lot and took photos, and always was fascinated about travel and learning about the world. And that was kind of one of the things that allowed me to do that, by looking at, wine bottles, where they were from, and intrigued me about regions. And then I worked in restaurants, bus tables, waited tables in different places, and a fine dining place in North Carolina. And then I moved to New York City for a little bit and worked at a restaurant there, Michael's, I think it was on 57th. And then that got me more exposed to finer wine and why, and, going over stuff with the staff and wine personnel. So, and I started collecting wine, from, when I could figure out a way to get it. And, I've had a collection of built up a pretty good collection of other people's wine. And I've always just loved cooking. I've had to cook from a young age, and, was never happy with just normal food. So I was always adding whatever was in my brain to create, and, just pairing the two has been a cultural thing, learning about the world, learning about the art of wine, and also enjoying, the moments that you have around food and wine and conversation.
That's really interesting. I guess I was under the assumption, wrongfully so, that you got involved with wine later in life, when actually it was one of the foundations that, maybe even before, as early as you were interested in or watching racing or watching your dad and watching the stunts and things like that. Wine has always been a part of your life. It's not something that you picked up later on. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's always been a passion of mine. But it was hard to do or consider that I would, become a wine owner throughout my career, because I had a clothing company. I was doing marketing. I was directing commercials and doing films and working every day on movie sets, flying the car races, and then the demanding schedules of a professional athlete race. And I was racing motocross when I wasn't racing cars, and so I didn't really have the time or bandwidth to pursue that, nor did I know how to pursue making wine. And if I actually thought it'd be later on in life, and I met a gentleman's son who was a third generation winemaker, and learned from him, and the rest is history as far as the wine
That
goes.
exactly the next thing I was gonna ask you, because it's amazing. You travel and you appreciate wines, and you interest wines, you study those things. But when you start getting down from a 50,000 foot view to that street view, when you're actually making the wine and involved in that process, there's a lot more involved than people realize with producing wine and making wine. And I was going to ask you, did you have a mentor or someone that kind of grabbed you by the hand when you said, "Okay, I'm going to do this. What do I do now?" So you were mentioning this gentleman's son who was a winemaker.
Yeah, so we were skiing in Mammoth, where I grew up, and just randomly went up the chair with this guy, started talking about things, and then uh, I don't even remember exactly how the conversation came up, but he mentioned his dad was a winemaker, consultant, and planted vineyards all over. They were, his great grandfather was responsible for, or great great grandfather responsible for bringing vineyards to Mexico, and so I got engaged with them, and they sent me some wine, and I go, okay, this is pretty dang good wine from that region, and I go, he definitely makes a style that I would be interested in learning about. So the first year he consulted with me, introduced me to farmers, and I've been in farming a little bit before, not vineyard farming, but farming is farming and the intrigue of it. So I understood a little bit of that dynamic, and from there I just started meeting more people, in the community so gracious and open, when you're dealing with small towns or farmers, that you get engaged with them, and if you understand what they go through and speak the language, it kind of makes it fun to see the community of winemakers, and how generous they are to educate and also introduce you to others.
So with that, when you're involved and you're starting this and getting the farming, what are some of the trials and tribulations that you ran into with getting the winery and the wine brand up and running? I guess the little setbacks, anything that you had with that.
Yeah, I think there's so many details about the industry. I've been involved in a lot of different businesses, and some businesses operate the same capacity or similarities to it across the board, but then there's a lot of different nuances in each industry. So learning those things are definitely trying. But I had good people that I could consult with, and then take my own vision and creativity and add it to that. But I mean, from you know, the years change, not being able to get grapes because the growing year wasn't good, to, transition of different owners of vineyards and operations, to just, I mean, every aspect of it, needing barrels when they're not available. And I tried some things that were maybe not as popular to see, and allow me the opportunity to get in more places, maybe Cabernet and Chardonnay are the top, in the States. So I didn't want to compete with everybody. I had a lot of different things. So I went into restaurants or stores. I could analyze what their shelf space looked like, or what was on the menu, and then offer them maybe something different. So I tried a lot of stuff in the beginning that was cost a good bit of money to do, versus like start out with one or two and then grow it from there. I started out with a lot more, and then shrunk it down based on what was working and what was successful in the marketplace. So um, there's a lot of trials and tribulations throughout in the learning process. I think the most difficult thing was figuring out the compliance part of it, and then also, what am I going to create for the brand? What is my brand going to be? Like, what am I going to name these things? So I really wanted to focus on, I mean, for a couple of years, I mean, I'm creating something from nothing. So that was the hardest part almost, is like, what am I going to design? What are the names going to be? How am I going to brand the product? What's my brand identity? And I've helped people with that most of my life, build brands and global marketing and global brand building and setting strategies and stuff like that. But then when it's on your own plate, you for me, it wasn't quite as creative because I think I had so much pressure. I'm just trying to think how to do everything right, and I didn't free flow on a creative standpoint. So my goal was to bring the art of winemaking back. I felt like the art of making the wine had disappeared a bit. The care and um, attention to detail and just taking the time and cost. Time is money in all industries, especially winemaking, and I didn't want to have that reflected in my wine. So I really spent a lot of time like, how am I going to make these things feel like I want? So, that was a big process figuring out names, the varieties that I wanted, and what I wanted out of each variety, both in the end product, but also the visualization of it and what you get and feel. I went with, I wanted heavy bottles. I wanted deep punts. I wanted the best corks. I wanted an art design that brought art back. So I drew all my labels and created, you know, the brand Stanton Barrett Family Wines. That's my logo. But then I went with that brand on some of the wines, and then I went special like things like this. My Sangiovese, the Wild Vitis vinifera, which is the wild vines of Sangiovese. Um, and since that's an old world variety, and so I write stories about it. I write the story why I call it Minarets, and then the artist series Merlot with the cobblestones, kind of reflecting what I experienced in Europe when you're walking vineyards, the cobblestones going through vineyards and kind of going into endless. So there's different things that I spent a lot of time. Most of the labels I drew in airplanes traveling to Europe, and I had time to just think for 10 hours and nobody bothering me, and got the pen out, and I would create, actually drew this and then tore it off and did it all by hand. So finding bottles that match, you got to find the glass providers, and man, it's just everything when you start up, it's a lot to
Yeah.
figure out. So there's been a lot of learning and stressful times along the way, but there's a lot to do with the wine, and then picking out barrels, learning about barrels, but getting good advice from different makers and what they like, talking to cooperages, getting their explanations, and then I picked on the Dolly barrels, which I felt were the finest barrels in the world. And then there was a great guy there that gave me a lot of, the sales gentleman gave me a lot of information. So I parlayed what I could read and then used my own creativity, and then asking him about what he would do, and based on what I was getting out of the grapes after we crushed, and as they're, through fermentation, to trying it in the tanks, was able to come up with some pretty good formulas, which I messed around with for a couple of years. And then I've really narrowed down what I actually like and work. And it's almost the same as I started with.
Stanton, everything you said was really spot on with like the learning curve and everything that you experienced going through that. I appreciate you kind of sharing that journey. There's obvious a business side of you, that's, you've been involved in a lot of that, but just hearing you talk about wine with the inflection and your voice and the look on your face, there's a passion there that, you have to make money in the wine industry to keep the lights on, but there's obvious that there's something deeper, that there's a passion, and that you want, you know, I have a feeling there's a motif with your personality that anything that you do kind of over the top and 100%, and it's got to be the way you want it and perfect. I kind of getting that from you. So I'm going to pull back from the winemaking just for a bit, because I want to give people a little bit of perspective on some of your past and the things that you did. Now, we know that you talked about some of the adversity. So perseverance in the face of that adversity is something that you've done all through your career with all the different hats that you've worn, racing being one of them. There was a time when racing dominated your life. That was the most important thing. That was the thing that you were doing more than anything else. How did you first get involved in racing and behind the wheel?
I was passionate about a lot of things. So my dad was a stuntman. He used to double Burt Reynolds and Paul Newman, and was Hal Needham's protege, who Hal Needham's the most famous stuntman in the history. Went on to direct like Smoking the Bandit, Hoover, Cannonball Run. So he and my dad were my mentors, and then guy named Mickey Gilbert who doubled Redford and done like all the Pretty Horses to Fall Guys and everything you can imagine. So I had some of the highest profile, most respected men in the movie industry as far as stunts go. Mentor me and my brother, and we really didn't care about stunts. We grew up around it. Paul used to come to the house. Paul was my godfather and one of my closest friends, and we learned how to swim in Burt Reynolds' pool, and John Wayne would call the house, and Bob Hope, and it was like we didn't think anything of it. We were just kids, and we thought these are normal. This is who we grew up with. They're just normal people, which is great because you don't have it. You don't put anybody on any tiered level. It's just they're just normal people. So um, we we grew up around it. I remember going to Universal for my first time. I was probably 5 years old or six. I used to love driving again. I told you I love to travel, and I'm always interested in what's on the other side. When I hike, I got to go to the next hill, and I got to go to the next country, and so on and so forth. So I love to go with my dad, and I drove down, and we went into Universal, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's stage one, and there's the shark. They're making some movie called Jaws or something, and you know, which brings me to another story. I'll get back to the what you asked, but then 20 years later or 25, I'm working in stage one in the pool that they have there. We're doing Jurassic Park, so all these things. I never thought I would be going where my dad was. I never thought I would be racing cars. My brother and I were racing motocross, and we were had a factory KTM ride when we were young, and then got I thought I was going to be either motocross or a fighter pilot, but I'd already broken so many bones by the time I was 16 years old, and I wasn't that good in school, and um, so I was like, well, and the Air Force Academy is not an option. So I thought it was, just motocross and ski racing and I don't know, whatever else. And then we became old enough, and my dad's like, hey, I need you guys to do some stunts. And, my brother and I, we did a lot of different sports, motocross, mountain biking, skiing. I rock climbed all the time. We just grew up around it. I had a camera in my hand, and my dad would take us to sets and show us, really important what the camera sees. It's not just about doing the action, but it's really important what the camera sees and how to make it look good for camera. And he's like, well, I just hire my two kids. They can do like 800 things, and I don't have to hire a bunch of other people. And so we kind of just fell into it. And then it was a good and lucrative career, and got to work with the best guys in the industry. And then when I was 16, my dad's like, hey, well, I'm going to send you to Buck Baker's racing school. And we're like, oh, cool. And so my brother and I drove from Colorado out to North Carolina and went to school. And they weren't like the schools now. They were full blown race cars and racing schools. You get out on the track, and they don't really hold you back. And we liked it and did well. And I'm like, well, I think I want to race cars now. I'm old enough. And that's kind of how it happened. I mean, I was around my dad racing NASCAR, but he didn't race a lot. I met a lot of great people, Richard Childress, Ricky Rudd, and I went to a lot of IndyCar races with Paul and flew with him and his plane, my dad, and so I was exposed to it, but I never thought I loved auto race. I loved it, motorsports in general. And that's just my dad did the rocket car in 1979 and broke the speed of sound in the Budweiser rocket car, and then he got into car racing from there with Bert and Paul and Hal, and then he did some sports car racing, then got into NASCAR. And so that uh, kind of the Days of Thunder is kind of based a little bit on that figure coming into NASCAR, and he did really well, but kind of dabbled in it after. And I think in 1991, my dad didn't want me to race, and there was called a Daytona Dash Series, which kind of the truck series took over as far as like a development series. And I went to the team and said, hey, I want to test, and made him a deal to run Daytona. And my dad was not happy about that, but then helped, and we got interstate batteries with Norm Miller, went on a retreat with him in Vel, and got him to sponsor the car and actually got them into the sport. And then I just worked my tail off, started learning marketing, working in race shops, learning how to work on the cars. I worked at Richard Childress's one summer for a few months doing cleaning out the attic to painting cars to spotting for Dale. And Dale said, "Hey, if you want to be a race car driver, you need to learn about race cars and work on them." And so I did that and learned how to market, sent out thousands of letters, made thousands of calls. It wasn't like today with internet, and jumped into car racing like I did with winemaking. Used
Wow.
my art to make better proposals, used to hand draw race cars and with the sponsors on there, put them in there, use my creativity and my art to do it, and a lot of hard work.
Wow. I said three hats. You really, there's so many other layers under each one of those things. So just curious, I think any passion or anything that you do, there's something that you like and something maybe that you don't like as much. What did you love most about racing, and what did you hate most about it?
Yeah, I love motorsports in general. So doing multiple things, it was a matter of like doing motocross on some weekends to make money, to doing films, to going to racing and figure out how I can get a ride. You know, racing's a very tough sport. It's very demanding, and it's hard because I really didn't. I had some help. Paul would help a little bit, but I was, my dad would contribute how he could. Uh, but I was kind of on my own a lot and trying to just figure out. I didn't have a mentor in racing per se to help me with manage a career, and the sport evolved pretty quickly when I got involved. Through the '90s, and then you had economic changes and how the industry changed based on that, and then just you know struggling and fighting to be in a race car. And a lot of it, I raced my own equipment. I would get rides from people, but I didn't have money to bring to the table. So it was, what I could do with what I made, and then building cars, and then working on the opportunity to getting hired to by other teams when they get rid of somebody, because back then you needed somebody to qualify. There was 20 plus cars going home from a race, all sponsored. So companies didn't like not being in a race. So I would get, usually I was telling a story the other night to some friends, like I'd go to the track, I'd be around, and somewhere between 5 and 10 races, I got a call to take somebody's ride over because they just needed to be in a race, and I could do that. Um, so it's an interesting career, especially managing like full time doing stunts and other things, and which helped me pay my normal bills so I could go pursue racing.
And
And
you were
then
doing
I
it
got
at the same time you were racing. You were kind of, there was a lot of crossover there. Some of those things you were doing back and forth.
I mean, there was probably 5 years where I didn't do any films because I was making really good money racing cars, and had good rides, and doing well. And then, but there was times not. And I also wanted to build a team. I wanted to be in motorsports, my life, and transition from a driver to helping other people pursue their careers and give them opportunities. So during that time, even though I raced for other people, I was actually running two cars in a full-time team
Hmm.
a lot of the time. So I was having to fund that. So at times, again, I was pretty lucky, and made enough money just racing cars. I turned a lot of movies down, and then had to jump back into film when I got out of car racing full time. But yeah, it was a full time job going back and forth, mainly because I was trying to give myself, nothing's guaranteed, and you read a lot, and what people read's not always the facts. So let go from a team. No, that team had financial issues, or I did what I was supposed to do there, and then somebody else brought money in, and then I'm out
Hmm.
with nothing. So I always had my team to fall back on. And we were operating in pennies on the dollars compared to other teams, and still running really well. So it's not been an easy career, but I've been very lucky to say that I've done it and had made a living, and got to race at all the iconic tracks and race against all the iconic drivers, from Bobby Allison to Davey Allison to Darrell Waltrip to Rusty Wallace, Earnhardt. So I've been part of a career that expanded a long time. And I still dabble in it. I get to run a couple races a year and do the vintage car stuff, which we build, and I get to coach guys. And run some pretty awesome cars and
Really,
still
that's
keep
cool.
my feet in it.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's some of those names that you mentioned there. I'm sure there's a lot of crossover. I mean, we're in the South. You're in North Carolina right now. I'm in South Carolina. Everyone knows racing, and everybody knows those names that you just mentioned. And it's just legend after legend that you know that you got a chance to kind of stand shoulder to shoulder with, which is amazing, absolutely
Yeah.
amazing.
It's
Um,
pretty cool. Definitely interesting. And when I got at Indy Cars, it was a new team. It wasn't good. We were very underfunded, but to be able to say I got to run Indy Cars and where I saw a lot of races with my godfather was always that was a real achievement just to be there, even though people don't say didn't do well.
mhm,
We ran well at some places, and you know almost had a top 10 finish. We had some problems, but just to be in an Indy car, that was a dream of mine, actually, for quite some time. Never thinking, going back to earlier, that I'd be a race car driver, but I mean, every kid's dream is like to go to the Indianapolis Speedway or to race something. I just didn't think it was possible. I didn't have the money to do that. And, to do that, do something new was exciting. So, and I ran Trans Am, and when I ran Trans Am, I had, I used my godfather's number 33, and that was cool just to do that. I had his Daytona watch and wore it in all my races and movies. So there was a lot of cool things that, you know, were sentimental to me that really nobody knew. I sat on the pole, broke the track record at Trans Am Racing, Homestead, and I got to take a picture of that and have his number, where he ran and won a lot of Trans Am races. So those kind of moments are really special.
yeah, absolutely. I read a little something. I was digging and found that your dad used to set up sort of an obstacle course for you and your brother. You and your brother set up an obstacle course, and you were doing your own like little mini stunt things in the backyard and stuff. Touch on that a little bit. That's kind of crazy.
Oh, well, I don't have their obstacle courses, but we always did stuff. We were always on the trampoline or jumping off the roof of the house and, taking our bikes down the hill and putting our foot in the front forks and seeing how hard we could crash and just stupid little things. We've always been doing something together, setting up tracks on the tennis court with our and my grandparents with our big wheels and racing each other. I mean, it was from tricycles to big wheels to bicycles to motorcycles to race cars. So, yeah, I mean, he taught us fights at a young age, boxing, and then how to fight for a film to, anything you think of. He was always kind of teaching us things about film or sports or something.
And how did your mother tolerate that? Was she just sort of, well, that's part of the business, or was she like, oh my gosh, these kids are going to kill themselves?
I don't know how she dealt with it. She definitely had her anxiety growing up, but I mean, in her right mind, she was a professional athlete. She was on the World Cup ski team, the U.S. ski team. She won a medal in the World Championships. I think she's the youngest woman to win a World Cup medal until like the Vancouver Olympics. I think she won in Heavenly Valley a World Cup race when she was 15. She made the Olympic team. So she's Ski Hall of Fame, and she's done marathons, 4 Ironman triathlons, 2 in Hawaii, 2 invitationals, 1 in Japan and New Zealand.
Wow.
She
Hmm.
finished second, I think, is the highest. Was leading and had hypothermia. So she has her own, sport background and skiing's extreme, but just as a professional athlete and a really good one. I had 2 parents that were hard to keep up with, but we couldn't keep up with for a long time. So they're very motivated and also a good sounding board in helping us, achieve to a high level. She's had her moments for sure of anxiety. She hates the stunts. She always calls and what are you doing today? I'm like, just nothing, just super easy, nothing. So I don't tell her what I'm doing, and she finds out somehow and freaks her out. And like, I'm fine now, so don't worry about it. Yeah, so scary.
But you were 9 years old when your dad brought you in to do some kind of stunt on the set.
No, my first one was I was 15. Back then they didn't really let kids do it now. Kids with their parents who are coordinators and whatnot, they do put their kids in stuff doing different things because if they're there and they're the ones signing off on it, usually you can get the studio and insurance company to do it, depending on what it is. But there's some kids that do some pretty cool stuff, not super dangerous, but in any way. But you still need a kid to fall down or ride a bicycle or whatever. But yeah, I was 15 when I started in the industry.
So do you remember what was the first stunt that your dad brought you on? Do you remember what you did and what the show was?
A movie, or it was a made for TV movie with Ricky Schroeder. It was called Terror on Highway 99. I rode on top of a hay truck going through a field and drove with my brother in a car and doubling. Think I was doubling Ricky Schroeder in some, and then I was just a random call indie nondescript stunt character. I don't remember everything. I just remember a little bit. I remember riding in the car with my brother as a passenger, and then I remember that flying through a hay or through a field on a hay truck, bouncing around and trying to hang on. Uh, but we got into a lot of other really big stuff, and I don't know if my dad was just trying to get rid of us or just knew we could do things that some other people wouldn't do or couldn't. I guess. Yeah, we've been through a lot together, a lot of fun times.
Well, you worked as a stuntman off and on. We talked about for a number of years. Is there a stunt that you personally performed or that you directed that really stands out as your favorite? You're like, wow, that was really cool to put that together, or I'm really proud of that.
I mean, there's so many, right? Everybody asks, I wants to identify like one moment. The moments that stick out the most are with your friends, or, a lot was working with my brother and my father on movies, doing some really big stunts and just being there with your family and the help and education of it and support was pretty phenomenal. But as far as like one stunt, I can't even remember a lot of the movies or TV shows I've been in until I get a residual check. I'm like, I did that movie? I don't even remember. So when you have like over 300 films and TV shows, it's hard to identify one. And I've done a lot of really big stunts. So I can't really identify one. I like doing really big stuff and keeping my cool about it and just getting the job done. There's so much involved in actually doing it. It's not being crazy. It's not whatever, but the just understanding film, understanding you're in the right spots at the right moment and timing's right and everything's right and you prepare properly and executing it. That there are so many that are really great memories. I think some of the coolest, like, what was it? I don't. Maybe it's Now You See Me. The first one I got called. Guy wanted to do uh, multiple car flips in a day, which we call pipe ramps. It was on a bridge in New Orleans, and we couldn't use traditionally what a cannon is when you slide the car and there's a either explosive or air cannon, which is basically a telephone pole in a cylinder, and you've hit the button at the right time, and the the cylinder comes out and pushes the car over. We couldn't do that because we were on the bridge. So he's like, I need this car to pass bus, hit a K rail, flip down the thing, not fly off the bridge, and all these things. And so he's like, can you do this? I'm like, sure. And so I put a lot of thought into building the ramp. And I've done them before. I've seen them a lot, but there's a traditional way and look of a pipe ramp, and I didn't want that. So I kind of created a new ramp and design to hopefully make it look more like a cannon, like it actually hit the guardrail and go up the guardrail and then flip and spin. So inventing something like that, super cool, and then it actually working was pretty awesome because it was different than any other pipe ramp that you saw, and it accomplished something that hadn't been done before without utilizing a cannon. And
And that's creative
that's
that you have.
creative. It's cool, and everybody. It's something that when you're building it, that you have everybody. Like, this guy's a wacko trying to figure out these angles and drawing stuff and measuring cars and taking wheelbases and tread width and weight and all these things. And that, I go in and help the effects guys a lot, or I build my own cages. And, I go in and I build it to the standard and safety that I'm privy to with NASCAR and all the safety technology that we implement. I'm like, okay, if I can do this in a race car, I know I can get away with this if I build it. So that brings a comfort level to me doing an actual stunt, even though you're going to get thopped a little bit. You know that you're going to be safe. So, creating that and then coming to you after, the stunt guy is generally the hero on set. People respect you, you do something good or big, and they think you're just nuts, number one, but then to execute it and make it look right is also very rewarding. And I had the effects guys, man, that worked. And to be honest with you, we thought you were nuts. Like this isn't going to work. What the heck's he doing? He's like a mad scientist over there. So, it's fun to get those responses from people and do some things different, and do with film and also even winemaking, you do something different than stuff that you've known other people do or what you've, learned. And obviously there's so much I don't know, or people I don't know and how they do it, but to do things and come up with creative ways. When you get a script, you read the script, the director has a vision, and you're like, hey, that's not going to work. You just can't do it that way. It's not realistic. We can't do it. And to revise a storyline with an action that tells this story and drives the story forward, those are a lot of the conversations that we have as a second unit director, a stunt coordinator, or even a stuntman that goes in with a coordinator. The coordinator trusts you to give the feedback. So you really work on a creative level, how to, articulate a scene or articulate a stunt or execute a stunt that looks good on camera, that tells the story in the vision that, or the impact that the director wants. So there's a lot involved with doing stunts that's meets the eye. And, most people, oh, you're just a crazy person that wants to go crash stuff and get adrenaline.
Yeah.
For me, there's not an adrenaline to it. It's about taking my skills and experience to the limit and doing things that are executed. And a lot of times you get one chance and that's all you get. And if you mess up, then, a lot of money goes into a production day. There's been productions on really big films where that day centered around one big scene or stunt. And if it goes wrong, that costs them millions of dollars and it's pretty much on your shoulder. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of thought that goes into a lot of the scenes that people see in movies that they might not understand or appreciate. And that's the kind of stuff that I thrive on.
So, other side of the coin, was there a stunt that you said, "Wow, I will never do that again," or was there something that you actually said, "You know what? That's not a good idea. I'm walking away from this." Has that ever happened?
No, not really. I'm a solutions guy, and then it's very important to understand film and what you're dealing with, so you can kind of give that what I just spoke about, that feedback to a director or a coordinator, or if you're the coordinator, how do you execute what drives the story, but also gives the impact that the director is looking for, and those are key elements to like. I have like, hey, we've gone to every motorcycle guy. Nobody wants to do this stunt. Can you do it? And you go down and look at it. I was jumping buildings in downtown LA where you had blind rooftop to rooftop and then over the street from one building to another. And the guys who they knew, they didn't want to do it. And I had worked with them several times before. And I'm like, can you do this? And I look at it and I go, I can do it. And you get up and do it. You can't test something like that. It's pure believing in your timing and skills. I set up things for it on the ground, but the transition and the blind of, only having so many feet to take off on a blind jump to hit a 14-foot rooftop to drop down 20 feet to another rooftop and then jump the building, building to building. So with a camera on the bike is like pretty hairy. So there's things like that I did a movie or a TV show in your neck of the woods, Charleston, where we had a car crash. It was this whole chase scene and car crash, and the director wanted a car to hit another car and go into a dump truck, just a sudden impact. And we're like, well, you can't. That never looks good. The guy's supposed to die, but I go, it never looks good when you go to a sudden into a tree or a sudden stop object, and you have to hit it so hard you pretty much can't live through it. So it took 3 weeks for us to convince the director this is not going to look good. So here's my idea, though. We can do a sidewinder. I can hit the front of the truck, and then that impact, you jump the car a little bit, you hit, you know,
Mm-hmm.
3/4 or whatever, it smashes. It's a big impact, and then it flips over. The energy keeps the car going. It stops on the truck, but at least you have some forward momentum. And so it took forever to convince them to do that. But that's part of our job to, like, okay, I know what you want. You want to look impactful and like intense, but what you want isn't going to give that. So sometimes it takes the creative experience and knowledge to like communicate that in an effective way to a director, and then execute it when, and that's again, all the pressure's on you because you pitched this and you're in a rush and they've shot all this other nonsense, and now you have like a few minutes at the end of the day when the sun's going down to like execute this plan that you had, and you told them it's going to be better. So you, everything rides on your shoulders. So those are the moments that are really critical that you perform, and it's to what you said it was going to be. Otherwise, you might not get another job.
Well, I mean, you've always
That was
everything.
for Righteous Gemstones, which is a fun show. We get to go down and do quite a bit down there. So,
Oh, that's
uh,
neat.
yeah.
But you've always challenged yourself. You know, you've always kind of pushed the edge, and you have that creative side to you, and everything that you've done. And I'm just curious. So, stuntman like your father, racing scene like your father. Did you always sort of feel destined to follow in those footsteps? I know that you said wine interested you in younger life, but was there something else at a younger age that you were passionate about besides racing and stunts and those things that you said, well, maybe I know you touched on maybe being an aviator, but was there something else? Maybe that was it. Maybe, you dreamt of flying or something, along those lines. We touched on that a little bit.
I mean, I always loved aircraft and motorsports. So, the first time I got to fly a plane was in Chuck Yeager's Mooney at Edwards Air Force Base on his lap. So the kid tell people that story who are in aviation or the Air Force. It blows their mind. So, I've always been a fan of aviation. I love fighter jets. I hated reading in school, but the only book I really read was about a fighter pilot in Vietnam. I used to be able to draw an F-16, an F-15 just by heart, and I loved aviation and aviation engineering and the speed and skill that it takes, to fly a plane. So flying's fun. I paraglide for a long, long time. I love being in the air. Even though when it gets really rough and you're really high, it's a little nerve wracking. But yeah, motorsports in general is fascinating. Business is fascinating for me in general. Marketing and building business and how you all the creative behind it and networking from B2B angles to B2C. I enjoy all those elements of motorsports and sports in general and business.
And you've done that with a lot of your businesses, right? You have movies, stunts, racing, and now winemaker. And you've always been competitive and creative with all those. And you brought that into winemaking. And I want to touch on this because you see some professional athletes that sometimes go and stamp their name on a wine or an alcohol brand, and that's it. They're away from it. You've been very hands-on with in the winemaking process, as we touched on before. But right out of the box, the first vintage that you had went to San Francisco International Wine Competition, which is a very well known, very well respected wine competition, and you took 9 out of 10 entries won medals. That's not by accident. That's kind of unheard of. Usually out of the box, there's a ramp up process, that you kind of. But right out of the box, you guys knocked it out of the park. What do you attribute to that success? Like just coming out of the gate and really making a name for yourself.
I don't know, it was nerve wracking to submit it, and I probably submitted them too early after bottling and probably still in bottle shock. There was no bottle aging. So, but I really was anxious to get a score to see even if I would get one medal and see if the quality of wine was what I hoped I could make and what I achieved to make. So to get that was a real honor, and to have gotten that the next time we entered. I think we entered another 11 or 12. They all won medals, and then we entered again, and all the ones that we entered all won medals. The first year we got 94 points, double gold for our Pinot Grigio, which was a Ramato style Pinot Grigio. And then since then, we've had high accolades. As far as like what it took to achieve that, it was just what I molded the brand after, and what I wanted a wine is bringing a quality of wine from the art stand aspect to the bottle, just feeling the quality from the outside. A heavy bottle, the best cork you can get, a deep pont, pretty artwork, a storytelling behind it, and the process of, and then also just being taking care of the wine, getting good grapes, having good yeast profiles, and adjusting that accordingly from information that you get and advice from people, and making decisions on that to making sure it's clean in the process, from crushing to tanks and stabilization, and taking the time with it, picking again the best barrels. I use 36-month staves. I do a double A toast on all the barrels, regardless of what style of toast it is, or what style of barrel it is, and all those things, plus barrel aging 24 to 36 months. I mean, that's time that a lot of people don't take with a wine, that in results bring a lot of complexity to it, a lot of smoothness, a long finish, and a fine wine that is smooth and represents the style of variety that I want in the end product to my consumer, and just bringing that quality out. So it's a lot of time, patience, and attention to detail through the process. Again, it's like working on a race car, doing something. You have to pay attention to every step. You have to pay attention to every detail that you're involved in, and not overlook or not get impatient to not take the next step, right? And make sure that you're covering the bases. And when you can do the basics and take care and be patient and put the energy that's required into, and it takes a lot of effort, no matter if you're racing or doing films or building a car. There's just a level of expertise, and also delegating that out to the people who know more than you, and understanding that, but then taking your vision in your mind and your own creativity, adding to that, and then creating a product to the standard that you set it out to be. And that's kind of how I mold my life after. And I really wanted to bring to my product and the winemaking process and the people that I work with.
You source grapes, so you have contracts with different growers and those types of things. And interesting, you'd almost have to, because you have such a diversification of varieties that you do. You touched on your Pinot Grigio, your Pinot Gris, the skin contact Pinot Gris. Um, and I've had a chance to sample through a lot of your portfolio. And that, to me, I can see why that won a double gold. That was an incredibly interesting and complex and texturally just fascinating wine that you did with that. That's one I think you guys really hit it out of the park. And you also talked about not being afraid to be creative and experimental and think outside the box. Everybody's making Cabernet and Merlot and Chardonnay in California, right? So step out of the box and do some stuff that's interesting. Your Sangiovese, things like that are a little bit maybe out of the realm for domestic palates to think about, but you decided, you're going to take the chance and do that. and I think very successful with those. So
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a fun process. When I went out, and there's so many blends out there, and you learn about the industry, and you can use 25% of different varieties and still call it the variety that you're putting on the labels. So my goal is really how do I create a complex wine that resonates with the variety and also sends the message of what I vision that product being, or what I've always liked in a different products and varieties. So on the Sangiovese, I've gone, you know, I try to make more old world wine, but without a blend. So it's 100% variety. It's single vineyard product. So, when people come and it's like, hey, why don't you do a blend? Or people I work with like, hey, we should mix this and that. I'm like, no, we're making 100% variety. There's 100% that grape in my wines. And I think it's a little easier when you're trying to take advantage of that 25% threshold and add a Syrah, add a Petit Verdot, add a little Merlot to it, get the complexity out of it. I'm trying to make a complex wine that has a lot of nuances um, that you want to drink, and you say, hey, this is a good wine. This is has a lot of layers to it, and you're only using a single variety. So that throws in a more significant wrench into the formula when you're dealing with that kind of vision and mindset. Like, this is how I'm making my wine now. Not that I won't ever do a blend or something else, because I always entertain, and I always, will take and mix my wines from the barrels just to see what I would potentially do if I was going to do something. But I really love the fact that they are 100% variety, and they're a single vineyard batch, and eventually and hopefully, and I'm getting there in some points where I have to adjust the model, but I'll adjust part of the brand to bring in a blend, or take advantage of being able to do that. A lot of people with Sauvignon Blancs and stuff, they add a few other things in there to create that smooth layered and texture, but I'm going 100% Sauvignon Blanc, I love thinking outside the box. I am barrel aging my Sauvignon Blanc in a nice French barrel, but how long you do that, what kind, it changes that into a smooth and a little different wine than people do. They're not sure how they like it. The Chardonnay, I go not the traditional heavy oak vanilla toasted. I try to hit more of a fruit forward, more of a European style, because the Chardonnay has a lot of beautiful juice and fruit aromas, and get that fruit forward out of the wine. And it's fun because I have so much wine, I get to pop corks all the time and try it out. And I've never had that luxury. I buy a case or I buy a 6-pack. I may open one, then I might save it for 5 years, open another one, give one away, and then try it again. So I get to see monthly the transition of the wines aging in the bottle. And so my Chardonnay, say from 18, has changed tremendously. Now more toast is coming out, more vanilla is coming out, but that's after 8 years, and it still drinks really nice. So define those like sensitive measures and the style that you want and how you make it, getting the acidity just right for the whites is tough. I don't want it to be too soft where you just feel like you're drinking a water, or you want a nice crispness, but don't get it overly crisp, so you have that sparkle to it. So, and again, that's some uh things in reds that some people get too much, sparkle and acidity out of it, and you don't have, there's a balance between smooth and crispness, and it's just finding all those details, and trying to combine it. And it's not always a proven method to do it. Like, if you do this, I couldn't even make a Ramato style Pinot Grigio. As hard as we tried, it didn't work out. So that doesn't always happen. And we were stuck. My Sonoma one was just ended up being a normal Pinot Grigio, nice, smooth, but it wasn't a Ramato, and we tried to make it. So, it doesn't always work out.
I think all of your wine in a blind tasting, and I'll admit this, I shouldn't admit this, but I'm going to admit this. Um, I would not have put your wines in California. I would have said that they were European based. Now, I hope I'm not insulting you by saying that, but I don't know if it's the stylistic choices that you make, which I think has some of it, but I think it's also some of the decisions of where you're getting your grapes from, that they are not big, giant, high alcohol, over extracted. These wines where you find someone's dumping a bunch of tartaric to try to balance that acid that you were talking about, and it's just their wine to me is layers, right? And those circles, either they're crossing over and they're all integrated, or you taste those wines that, okay, here's the fruit over here, here's the acid over here, here's the tannin here. They never kind of come together. All the components are there. You run a laboratory test on it, all the numbers look good, but they're just not together. And I think a lot of European wines in general have more of that togetherness than some of our domestic counterparts. And I think your wines have that. I
Well,
think they
thank you.
layered complex.
Yeah, and that was the goal, and I appreciate that you recognize that we've achieved that, and that has been the mold. Like I really, through collecting thousands of bottles of wine and tasting them all over the world and in California, and I like California wines, but I think some of the new world wines have got away from traditional winemaking and gone into like a whole broad base of how to, which is fun because it pushes the envelope of what you can do, but also I think based on American consumers and American economics that they've rushed the winemaking process. They've got a little lazy or just cheap in the process. So you've lost some of the quality, even on some really fine wines that are expensive in California. I just don't find the quality there. So I have molded my winemaking process and what I want from the bottle more in a European style. So you see things in my wines that you won't see here. Again, the Chardonnay is made more
Mhm.
in that style and the Sauv Blancs because I've been and had some of the best, Sancerres and in wines that I really enjoy that complexity but simplicity with fruit forwardness that has the right acidity and that is our vision is not high alcohol. Now sometimes you can't um, the way nature is and when you schedule you don't know how weather I mean it can change that fast and you've scheduled picking based on the bricks and but our goal is to make a lower alcohol wine but let the grapes and that's where the vineyard managers and the vineyards that you choose you can get the nice complexity from the grape and the fullness without getting the bricks too high. So we do focus on a little bit lower alcohol if we can get it. I don't. I want to be in the 12 to 14% and try to still get on the lower alcohol, the complexity that you want in it. And as far as the reg, that really comes in the time in the barrel and the type of barrels that we pick and the combination of the toast and where the wood comes from to create that spice or a certain profile that you want. But because of the barrels and the process between, the staves and the AA toast, which is a water mist toast on the barrel when they're making the cooperage, and it allows for a nice char, but in my opinion, it doesn't, over char it and it doesn't open up the pores of the wood. So you get this like heavy oak and tannins and then you don't get this over toasted
Mhm.
that takes away from the fruit forwardness. So it's a process of what we do and choose, and then picking a long portion to stay in the barrels for that long. It allows the oxidation to happen. It allows your bottle to age for a long time and see the transition in the bottle aging process. So yes, we focus on a fruit forward wine. You smell it, you taste it, you taste the tannins, you feel the oak, you feel the spices, the tobacco, the leather, the chocolates, and then much later on, you get the toasted notes, and then you'll pick up some other spices, and it's a 15-second, 20-second experience. So that's really what we went after for, or what my vision was. And then again, getting a lot of input. I knew a little bit because I did talk. I'd go to vineyards and I'd talk to winemakers and I ate it up, right? But then, like I said, you know what you don't know, and then my Mark at Nadali was very informative because I my first year was like, you need barrels. I'm like, you should have told me a year ago. Like, okay. So then I called them up and like, what can I get? I need Colbert barrels, and they're your best barrel and why, and then just all the reading, and I'm pulling out what I read. And again, with cooking, I'm a mad scientist. I just start and I just create everything, and it just turns out because I do things that are contrasting. Like I said, you get contrasting things that you wouldn't expect, but they come in different ways throughout the process. So I applied that to the winemaking. I did stuff that is like, well, you know, people don't really barrel their Sauv Blancs here. I'm like, well, I'm going to do it. And nobody makes a Ramato. I think we were only the second person in the nation that made a Ramato. It was in one of the magazines. We just do different things. And I set out. Some people don't like the Chardonnay, but now that trend of Chardonnay is getting more popular. Um, Putting the Sangioveses in a French oak that's meant for white wines over there, but it's a good barrel for high acidic. Well, that was totally his recommendation. So I tried a different, a fruited one, which is, and one that's, uh, one's called Fruité and one's called Espace. So I mixed it up. I'm like, oh, I'll get some spice and I'll get some fruit out of it. But, the Sangiovese is a higher acidic grape, and so I
Right.
get information and I go like, yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm not afraid to try stuff. So that comes from my background, I guess, with all the movies and in sports and whatnot.
If you're not experimenting, I mean, that's where serendipitous, this, that, let me try this, and then you find something amazing. If you do everything exactly the same, then there's no discovery. So it's refreshing to hear you saying that you're taking that angle and that attitude towards the winemaking.
That was a fun process to do that, but it's not as fun anymore because I kind of found my formula. So I'm like, okay, I got, what am I
I
going to do now? I don't want to move away from what we're doing because it's working.
Through everything that you've done, and now through winemaking, you found a way to tie wine to a deeper purpose, right? To some philanthropy. The Ethereal Sauvignon Blanc, the Ethereal Sauvignon Blanc Reserve Project. I want to say it right. Can you take a couple minutes and just tell our listeners what that is, how that came about, and why that's important to you?
I've always been involved with charity stuff. My dad and mom both, very active in that. And Paul was, obviously a tremendous philanthropist who's donated tons of money on all kinds of things from helping children, with medical conditions to building hospitals and, you know, orphanages all over the world with my dad. And so I've always had a charity interest in that's been important. So it was just a friend of mine, Renee. She does these beautiful paintings of butterflies, and I'm just went to her and like, hey, let's do this. And then ethereal has a meaning behind it. Butterflies have a meaning behind them as far as the transition in life and what that means. So I came up with the name to fit the butterflies, and I wrote a message about it, and I go, I want to donate. My goal was to, raise awareness about, anything and contribute 100% of the proceeds to that charity. So we did an event in Florida with Scott Hamilton for the 17 vintage of Ethereal, donated to his cause. And, he came and spoke. We auctioned paintings off. Of course, I bought them because I wanted them. And, um, I designed the bottle. It's a beautiful bottle. It's like, again, these things have a lot of layers to the art. The silk, the rose edgure rose. It's foiled. It's embossed. It's de-embossed. There's a lot of detail to it. The ethereal has some of the butterflies are spot gloss. Some are not. Some are embossed. Some are de-embossed. There's some foil in the print. It looks like a painting. I used a canvas style paper for it. We got some recognition for him. We raised, maybe $60,000. That's not a lot to some people, but that's, I made the best effort I could, and we were able to, help out some. And it's a fun thing to do, and also to make something, and hopefully turn something into more than you can give. If I were to spend $20,000 on just giving it to them, maybe I could make something and turn it into more money. So without having the luxury of an endless budget or whatnot, I just try to be creative in how I can contribute to help other people.
Okay.
And cancers are very serious. I've had a lot of friends passed
Uh,
away from cancer, and my godfather too. So I've always, cared about that subject. And I met Scott at a charity event, and obviously is an idol. And when I grew, growing up, seeing him in the Olympics, I always watched the Olympics because, well, most people do. But being that I had family in it, my grandpa coached a ski team at one time and stuff like that, there's a real connection there, and I respect professional athletes and what it takes. Similar as like the training and the dedication it takes crosses over into every industry that you get involved in.
Maybe not to the same level of understanding and respect that you have for it, but I think there's a general appreciation of that. You have so many hats, so I'm going to switch your hats again here. And you've owned and been a part of so many different businesses, and there's no business without marketing. Um, my curiosity, especially from race car driver, stunt guy, this sort of has like beer and barbecue kind of feel to it, right? Do you think there's a niche for marketing in race car? Now I know the Barrett Family Wineries does sponsor your team, right? It's one of the sponsors for your team.
Yeah, I do some with it. It's a good, just from a branding standpoint. I don't have the financial means to like do all the things that I know how to do and can do lately, but that's going to change, and I'm going to be able to activate. So I really had to, I was involved with another business. It was been really difficult with some things on that business that's not allowed me to be able to put my full effort into the wine. And there's a lot of things that I know and I can do to from the marketing standpoint, but when I can, I plug it in, to get materials of the race car and getting that out there, getting to speak about it on the radio or TV, and then just also having the material to show, you know you know grocery stores or in regions that you are doing marketing and you're doing marketing on a national scale. That allows me to be able to present in material. We spend a lot of time creating photos and social media stuff. Not that that drives sales, but what it does is it shows the brand and the product that then I can put into decks when I go on sales calls or sales meetings, and they can see that it does look like a national brand, that we have a nice material to present, whether it's for POS or just showing a consumer or a restaurant. So you know, that always doesn't end up in direct sales immediately, but it is, those are materials that you need to when you're trying to grow a brand and you go to a new distributor, so you can show them like this is just, we're not just an individual with a dream. We actually do have a good business foundation, and I know what I need to do to grow the brand. I know how to market it, and I know how to present the brand so it looks like a brand that is substantial. Even though we're young and new, you still have to have those elements when you're creating a business and you're trying to make it successful. So, I don't have to put it on the race car. I do because it helps in the overall brand building and just getting out there. We're not in enough stores. We don't have enough SKU space to actually uh, benefit from that right now. But it's a transit. It's a process.
Right.
Like I said, just picking out grapes, and then you have a process of making it into an end product. Similar with the marketing side. Not everything that you do is for immediate benefit, but it's part of the process that you need to do if you're going to build it.
Well, Stan, we talked about how you're always pushing the envelope, always kind of experimenting and doing those things. Can you give us some insight? Can you give us an insider information? What's next for Barrett Family Wines? Any new projects, new regions, new experiments? Anything that you're working on that's not quite out there or public yet that you can share without.
I wouldn't say that nothing's out in the public. I mean, I did expand into Sonoma County and Napa area. So, I've released a Sauvignon Blanc and a Pinot Grigio, um, from Dry Creek Valley and Russian River. So, transition there. I started making Merlot out of Sonoma County and Cabernet. And I just got to taste the Cabernet, which we started in 23 and 24. The 24 is not been in barrel that long, but it's going to be the best wine we've made so far, I believe. And also the Merlot. Merlot's my favorite grape. I don't, everybody has their opinions about it, and that's another fun story. But so, making Syrah in Alexander Valley, but the Syrah in Temecula is very, very good. And down there, because of the heat,
Mm,
it's really hard to find a Syrah grape that can match what you can actually grow and make in Temecula. So it's just finding reason, but the hardest thing is finding the right vineyard.
mm-hmm,
Contracted a great vineyard in Sonoma County. It's only less than 5 acres, and to be able to contract that and get the same um, vintage, the same variety over multiple vintages is fun because you see, what nature does. And so I'm transitioning a bit more in that area. It's difficult to maintain getting the quantities of grapes that you need in Temecula. There's really high demand down there. And so just experimenting and adjusting based on economy, based on economics and weather and other elements, where I can source the highest quality grapes, but source the same ones over and over so I can, make a consistent wine and understand what I'm getting from that particular vineyard. Um, so look for, I think, I did bottle the 21 Merlot in Sonoma and haven't released that yet, but it's pretty fun. And, we're still 2 years away from the Sonoma Cabernet and 2 years from the Alexander Syrah. But, I have my, 24 to 36 months in barrel, but they're progressing pretty good. I'd still want the time in the barrel for the oxidation and them to just, I don't know, man, the 24 is smooth just the way it is, but I think it'll be interesting. I might have to adjust the time frame because it's so much there already. So yeah, we just adjust, and but I'm really excited to bring those out to market and release those.
oh, great. Fantastic. All right. I got some rapid fire questions for you. These are those one sentence answers. Okay. Best thing about being in the stuntman business.
I guess it's the friends and the community that you meet and get to work with, and family
Okay. Great answer.
and the creative side.
Okay. There is that creative theme that you have. Yes. Worst thing about being in the stuntman business.
Working with people you don't like.
That's fair enough.
The pros and cons. You get to work with the best people, and then sometimes you don't have that luxury.
Understand that. Um, Best thing about racing.
And racing's so complex. It's like wine and everything else. And same with movies. I'm not very good at one sentence answers, but I think again the complexity of the art of racing is fascinating, and there's so many nuances to it. It's really a skill of man and vehicle, and how to get the most out of something, but also the engineering part and the mechanics of it is just really fun. Just the attention to detail and building something is from the ground up that you get to go manhandle on the track is, and pushing yourself, pushing the limits of that car and yourself, and not making a mistake is really fun. There's so many elements to car racing that people don't have any idea. They just think you're going in and going fast, but it's there's so much detail, and that's really what's fun.
If there is a worst thing, what's the worst thing about racing?
I think the worst thing is obviously the the mortality of it. You just losing friends. You go on the track, and the next thing or you wake up and somebody's not there. It's losing people that are even in your industry or close to you, or the risk of it. It's a fairly safe sport, but it is also very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. All right, a little bit lighter. Best thing about being a winemaker.
It's sharing it with friends and even strangers, and becoming friends through it, and just the hard work it takes, the risk it takes from time and financial, and creating something that you can tell a story as to why and how it was made, and sharing that over a great meal and conversation is really, you know, extended friends or even acquaintances for weddings, or just meet somebody on the road and say, hey, you like, you see they like wine. It's like, hey, I'll send you a gift. And it's sharing it is the most rewarding part for me.
I love that. I wholeheartedly agree. Um, if there is a worst thing about being a winemaker,
Just supply chain, dealing with the changing again with economics and nature. You're always having to be on your solution mindset. How do I overcome? Just there's so many things, but most of it has to do with supply chain or shipping.
I'm really going to put you on the spot now. What's your favorite wine from Barrett Family Wines?
As far as from my collection, I like them all for different reasons. Merlot. I mean, I like that. I mold them after uh, what I vision that variety being, and I feel like I've done a good job to do that and what I wanted from the wines. But again, the Merlot grape has so many layers of fruit and the berries that come out and the spice that comes out and the beautiful dark. Liquid is just it's complex. It goes well with all kinds of food. So that's my personal favorite. This one here, call it the Artist Series
Hmm.
Merlot. And but when I drink wine, I really drink it for what I'm pairing for food, or what kind of emotional state I'm in. What's gonna meet my personality that day. And I like to try them all, but that's my go-to.
Okay. So now we're going to go off brand. If you had a favorite wine outside of your portfolio, something that you go, wow, this is special. I know you've had a lot of traveling all over the world, a lot of different wine regions. Hard to pick one. But if you have one that's your favorite wine or region that you would have a wine from.
I have to look at the bottle. There's an Austrian wine that I really like. When I go over to Europe or anywhere, I try all kinds of wine, and I do like my styles, and I don't like some of their styles, but on the higher end, I do. But I drink more California wines than anything, just because it's accessible. Diamond Creek and Anomaly. I used to really enjoy the Farnientes. I have a lot of them, but I like the stories behind them. I've been to the vineyards. I know what they do. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons why you like a wine, right? But I think when you look at keeping quality and the story behind it, or the family behind it, is pretty interesting. So I guess, those ones kind of stand out to me.
Now, if you weren't drinking wine, are you a beer, spirit, cocktail person as well? Is there anything of those that you like?
This time in my life is different than when I was younger. I mean, I really love wine because, again, that just sipping and enjoying, and there's more to it than just, drinking alcohol. I love to cook. I guess if I go out to dinner, depends who I'm with and what region I am. I very much explore the culture that I'm in. So if I'm in Mexico, I might have a tequila and try different that, and or a mixed thing. I would drink Mexican, style beer. If I'm in Japan, I'll go and drink that cultural
Mhm.
thing, and same in countries in Europe. So I mix it up based on where I am. But at home, or going to dinner with friends, a dirty martinis like a first choice. I'm gonna go that route. I really don't drink much hard alcohol. I like the process and I enjoy the business of it. I do like beer, but it my go-to is wine now. And again, I it depends where I am. I'm very much a person of environment and location, based upon what I'm going to do for my overall experience for the day when it comes to beverages or food.
I call that colloquialistic drinking.
Okay, now I got the word for it. I'll use that.
We're going to step back away from wine just a little bit. Most memorable actor or TV personality you worked with?
I would have to say that's my godfather, Paul.
Great choice. I think I
I'm very lucky. I've got to work with most of all the biggest actors, but being that who he was in my life and the type of person he was is there's nobody better really. There's a lot of great people. He's just a class act as an individual, humble, most successful, probably one of the most successful actors of all time. And just to see what he did for people and how he treated people and who he was as an individual, just they don't come any better than that.
That's fantastic. I'm gonna get a little personal. Moment of your greatest disappointment.
Man, I've had a lot of those. I don't even know that one. There's been a few. Most of it's probably been around, racing, like missing a certain race or getting in a crash or somebody causing something that had high consequence for me, with my career financially to like next steps. I mean, there's so much on the line and there's so much that one deals with that most people don't know, but uncontrolled event that happened in motorsports probably.
Okay. Your great, and you've had so many. This is going to be a difficult question, but your greatest accomplishment.
Man, I don't know. I think for me, hopefully it's the type of person that I sought out to be in character and why I do things for the right reasons. I hope that's what people can say in the end, and that's what I try to do. So hopefully that's my greatest accomplishment when I'm passed along or just in somebody's daily life as far as an influence.
You've had there's a motif and listening to the things that you said and the stories that you told and the angles that you took approaching all those different hats that you wore, right? Multiple careers. We talked about all the things involved with stunts and directing and movies, racing, but all the different hats you wore and the things that you did with racing. All of these careers have, there's that motif. They all have huge learning curves. They're all difficult to make a name for yourself in. And you've done that in all three, right? So I think we've come full circle with that whole triple stack comment that I made in the beginning. Let me ask you this. You've done all that and you've woven this interesting three things together in your life. Is there another challenge that's on the horizon? Is there something after wine? Is there another thing besides you did stunts and racing and now wine? Is there another step?
I don't really know. I mean, I still need to make my wine successful, where it can stand on its own 2 feet. I've directed film. Well, I've directed, a lot of second unit and one film, directed and produced. I would like to do another film, and I've been working on that. So it's extremely tough to put those together. But you know, I'm on the later stages of like career and life as far as work goes. I really love racing cars. I enjoy teaching people and building these cars and taking people to the track for races. And I still want to accomplish some things on a professional level of racing, but I don't really worry about what's next. I just pursue things that are passionate to me and things still. I wouldn't say anything really new's gonna come up, but you never know, and I'm definitely not closing my door to that. I guess I do have some plans and some people push me in certain directions, but that's not so much like creating new businesses, something more consulting and speaking and giving you know, whatever experience in life or in building businesses. But I just primarily take everything one day at a time. I do want to make the wine more successful, get it to a point of standing alone a little bit more. But I just take each day at a time. I don't count anything out, and if it's something that catches my attention and resonates with me, and I believe I can do it well, I'm not opposed to jumping anything. But the older I get, I realize my bandwidth is only so much, and I don't want to overdo it. I've had a big load for a long time. I've been working since I was 15 years old, basically in professional careers and business and multiple things. So,
Well, I'll tell you, Stanton, I very much enjoyed our conversation today, and I got to learn more about, well, your passion is contagious. I learned more about you as a person, and sort of it makes sense because I think I really believe a winemaker's personality shows through in their wine. If they're directly involved in that, if they're emotionally involved and attached to that process, it definitely shows through in their wine, and it absolutely does with yours as well. I want to thank you very much for taking the time with us today, and I do want everyone to know how. Now, obviously, your wines are just starting out in some of the growing the distribution, but are consumers able to order from you direct from the website?
Yes, they can. They can go to Stanton Barrett Family Wines.com or SBFwines.com. You can, most some states are restricted, so it just depends on where you live, but you can go on there and order. If they're a retail or a grocer or a restaurant or anything, I have a Cellard in Idaho as a distributor, and Try It, Saratoga Eagle in New York, and then Symphonia Cellars in North and South Carolina, which is new. Or just reach out to us. It's pretty easy to contact us through the website. No, I mean, I appreciate the individuals like you and companies that actually search out individuals or companies in general in the industry to get them exposure and, wine, the competitions that you do and everything else. If it wasn't for those kind of individuals, we wouldn't have a platform or anything to showcase our wines and get the exposure. So,
Well, Stan, honestly, it's my pleasure. Part of my passion is finding smaller producers because, as you said before, I think that's where the magic still happens. Somewhere along the way, I think the wine industry has lost its sense of identity. When you find other people that are kindred spirits that kind of have that belief for you, you want to tell people about that. So it's my pleasure to help promote and to show people some of the special things you're doing.
yeah, thank you. Because it does take a lot of effort. I could have went throughout the bulk wine, find somebody to just pack, take some, you know, slap my label on it, but I'm very, very active in the process and enjoy it. And, a lot of effort's taken, and with effort, you usually get a good end product that you're proud to represent. And that's what hopefully I'm doing, and it is fun.
Thanks so much for watching. If you didn't catch it, my name is Dennis Fraley, and this is the Bottle Talk on YouTube. Subscribe to my channel and join me in exploring the world of wineries, distilleries, regions, producers, and more.